Right, so welcome to another episode of Silver Service at the Cattle Show. Today I am joined by the wonderful Julie Furt. Julie is a globally recognized award-winning customer success leader, having led teams of over 250 people across 20 countries. She comes with a multitude of experience across over 20 years. In fact, I was looking. I've worked closely with Julie over the years. And so welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
That's all right. It's a pleasure. So I guess first of all, to kick off, one of the quick things there, obviously from the intro, you've managed massive teams in the past. So I wanted to kind of kick off our conversation with what is your recipe? What is your go-to recipe for building great teams and just actually building great teams of that size? I mean, that's a huge magnitude of people across the globe. So I think, the whole remote management and remote hiring that we're seeing now, how has that been for you over the years?
Well, it's been great. I mean, I think that the biggest thing for me is about empowerment of the team and making sure that they understand what good and great looks like. What I find is that individuals want to do well. They want to give to the organization what the organization gives back to them. And that when you allow them to understand what good and what great look like, and you empower them and give them the tools to do that, that they will take it upon themselves to be great. And so that's the biggest thing for me. How do you do that? Well, you hire great leaders below you, you hire your successor, you make sure that those people are there, and then you make sure that you have that as part of the culture. Make sure they want to hire their successor in with them, or identify the person that's already on board to nurture, and then provide systems and processes that allow them to be successful and give them the right support. So that's I think the secret sauce. I don't think that it's revolutionary, but it's awfully fun when it happens correctly.
It's one of those things, I think, like you just probably one of the key points there. I think always looking at the successor. I think looking at getting people that you can help grow their careers. That's always been a belief side from mine in terms of management. Like whenever I look at the people on my teams, it's like, right, what I want to try and do is build somebody that can replace me, that then means I can sort of step up as well. I think, I was always taught very early on, it's quite dangerous to become completely irreplaceable, or if you don't, you've got to have somebody that can replace you as well. So
well, it's constraining on you as a leader. So I mean, even if you feel like it's job security for you, in fact it's not, because it means that you can't go do whatever the next fun, cool thing is, or you're quote unquote stuck where you're at. But I think it's beyond that, which is like, you should be able to look down in your organization 2, 3, 4 levels deep and be able to recognize the talent that's ready to accelerate and start working with them ahead of an opportunity that's there. Because when the opportunity comes up, it's too late to start nurturing at them at that point. And then similarly for yourself, if you're trying to look at it for more of a what's in it for me, once you get people to that place, it allows you to concentrate on areas of the business that you might not get to day to day otherwise.
Definitely 100% agree with that. I mean, so obviously when we've worked closely together in the past, obviously we've had the recruiters sort of doing the day-to-day stuff. I know we've worked on some really innovative projects on, right, how do we actually sort of, just when we hit surges and things like that, how do we get creative around building, and I hate the word pipeline, but I think that community of people that can kind of feed in and hire quickly. I think when you're hiring that many people, like the sheer amount of time spent, not only from yourself, but also your team side of interviewing, what's kind of your approach or opinions about how to create a really sort of synergy focused interview process that also has a good candidate experience, that means that you're not having dropout or whatever it may be?
Well, I think there's some really awesome things we've done to collaborate together. And one of the things that I love about the collaboration that we've done is what we've not just marketed internal or externally, but also internally, so that the team knows, like, why we're celebrating. Like they believe in the things that we're saying externally. They understand what those messages are. And then likewise, they know what we're looking for in the people that we're going to go hire. And so we get a lot of referrals that way because they know a lot of people. And so all of a sudden, like your pipeline is of much higher quality coming in. The interview process, you don't have to be as good at the interview process if the quality of the pipeline is there, which is something that you've been great at helping me achieve. And then the people who are interviewing are already up to speed on what good looks like from that perspective, because they understand what they have as a culture. It's front of mind, and they know what they're looking for. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then of course, standardization. I'm not a fan of giving people a list of questions that they need to ask at each stage. I think that defeats the purpose. If we were going to do that, we could just hand them to the product. But to ask the biggest thing that I always ask an interviewer is, would you want this person on your team, is the first one. And the second one is, will they make the team better? Right? Because we don't need people who are more senior necessarily. We need have some specialized skills. Sometimes we do, but not at scale. But we want to know that the person who interviewed believed that the conversation led them to think that the team will be better as a result of that human joining. And that can be a lot of things. And then letting them use that as a framework for what questions they have to ask to get to that answer.
I think interestingly, I read something last night and actually made a comment on it, which was around people talking about, bringing on A players, right? This mentality of bringing on A players. And I was like, well, I struggle with this idea of just focusing on the A player, because it's like I've seen too many A players fail at, within other roles, and I've seen some great B players turn into great A players. And I think this whole mentality, I think what you're talking about there is, when you ask, would you want somebody on that team? It's about finding almost a challenger player, is what I sort of term it as. It's somebody who's willing to take on the challenges. And I think through the interview process, being really succinct in terms of saying, these are the challenges that we're facing. I think, I've seen it multiple examples where people have joined the company and kind of gone, I'm so happy that somebody gave me warts and all and told me what the reality was, and it didn't scare me off, because it actually made me kind of go, I can solve for some things here. Is certainly in my own career search. What I've been looking at is those companies with amazing cultures and with no problems whatsoever. No company has no problems, but I think in terms of those companies that don't really talk about the challenges that you're going to face, it's kind of like, well, I'm excited about the challenges, Percy, and I think you're a very similar person in that respect. It's like, I want a challenge to go and solve for, because then it's something that gives me purpose to the role that I'm going in. And I think when you're talking about the way the team sees somebody that they're interviewing, it's looking for that challenger mentality or that challenger player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally hate the idea of like the concept of an A player or a B player. I really think that how somebody performs is contextual to the environment that they're in. And there's a responsibility of the environment to allow them to be successful. So I think of it more as what I'll call self-performers. These are folks who are going to navigate things on their own. They don't need a lot of support around them. They're going to figure it out. And then supported performers, people who are going to be great, but they need to have a framework. They need to get told what great looks like. They need to be given that little bit of a leg up on making it a little bit easier to be performing. And then unfortunately, you are going to end up with people who are going to be non-performers, people who, well, maybe it's not the right environment for them. They have something else going on. They choose not to participate. And so I really think it kind of falls into those three categories. And that's how I see it. And it's not necessarily one person is only ever in one of those three buckets. They can switch in between depending on where they're at in their career, what's going on at home, all of those things. But that's how I like to think of it as, we've got a group of people who are going to be out and ahead and driving us. And then we get a group of people that we just need to be sure that we make them successful. And we've got a group of people that we have hard conversations with.
Yeah. I think definitely in terms of looking at when somebody falls into a struggle point, I think, as a leader, I mean, we're coming away from hiring right now, but I think just supporting great people, and I think the more you support great people, or you sort of look internally and kind of go, well, what could I be doing better? What could their manager be doing better? What could their leader be
Yeah.
doing better? I think it's more of a self. If somebody's failing, the first thing that my go-to is, what could I be doing better? And I think that's always the question that I've challenged leaders with as well, is like, well, if we've got somebody that's failing, are they in the right role? Do they need to, do we need to look at other opportunities within the business that they probably would be more successful in? I think everybody has skills that they can put to it if they apply themselves. And sometimes, just a general business or general culture isn't the right fit. So sometimes it's not a case of it's not the right role. Sometimes it's just not the right company. I know I've experienced that in the past as well. I think interestingly, when you're talking about that, the framework there of what I remember when we've spoken about what I think when we were working with Ian on the from the recruitment side, he was exceptionally good at actually engaging with you and the team in terms of understanding, right, what does good look like? Not what does good look like from a recipe, zero and ones, but it's like, how do we actually find the right mentality for people coming into this organization as well? And I do think there that the better we get as a business or as a business unit as doing that, it makes actually the attraction part so much easier. I think if you can get really good leaders and really good managers actually and get be open and transparent to celebrate that externally, that actually helps the business grow and find the right people, because it'll attract the right people to that pipeline, that then you've got the right pipeline coming in as well, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we did kind of veer off of the hiring, but to recircle back to that piece,
Yeah.
like it is contextual, right?
Mm.
So one of the things that I do is I build out large globally scaled organizations. And sometimes we're going into new locations, new markets, things like that. The profile of who's going to be successful is that self-starter, that self-performer. But it's not unusual for us to identify a candidate and say, this is a great candidate, but they're a supported performer. We don't have the support system in that particular market, geography, whatever that is right now. But let's keep talking to them. Let's have an honest conversation with them. Like, we would love to have you join the organization when we're ready to make you successful. Yeah. And I've done this a number of times where I've circled back with people 12, 18, sometimes 24 months later and said, hey, we weren't ready then, but we're ready to make you successful now. What do you think?
And do the planets align? Is it the right time for you as well as us? Like, I think that's one of, you were always really one of the early adopters in terms of our nurture process, in terms of, right, how do we, just because a hiring team comes back with a no, is it a no, or is it a not right now, like type thing? And I think being able to support people as a business as well, as you get people going through the process, being able to say, hey, this is maybe where somebody just trumped you a little bit. But here's some tools, or here's some training that you could kind of do that we would advise if you're still interested in this. We loved everything else, but just, the planets didn't align on this particular one. And I think that's a game changer for an organization, to be able to offer not only feedback, but the potential tools for that person to go and grow and sort of saying, right, this is what the market is looking for, if this is what you want to do with your career. And I think sort of just stepping out of that slightly as well, I think one of the things that I remember we worked really closely with, the entire sort of TA team and the people team in general, the HR BPs and things like that, of looking at that careers matrix as well. I know you were a massively early adopter for that for us, in terms of, I think I can't think of how many projects in total it was like, you were the one that was like, yes, I want some of that. I want some of that. But the careers matrix point, that was really one of those, because people, I think a lot of people going into business or going into roles, think about their career path on a linear line. And it's like, I think we need to kind of get away from that and kind of go, do you know what? There are so many different avenues outside of that linear line that we can take. But helping somebody understand, what do they need to achieve? Like, what was that for you? Like, what was your takeaway from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, you've got your self performers, which is going to be your minority, by the way, and then your supported performers. And it's one of those you don't know what you don't know kind of things. We have one individual who's had in 4 years 4 different roles that we've asked them to step into, and they and us probably wouldn't have a great idea of like, this is going to be a great match moving things along, except that we've mapped things out and said, hey, like when you go from this track to this track, these are the things that change. And being able to say like, hey, they're really good in the track that they're in, but they also are really good at those 1 or 2 things that you need to tweak to be able to move to the next one. And it's allowed that individual to have full years in each of those 4 roles as the business has evolved, but they're evolving their career as the business evolves, the needs. And I think it's fantastic because it's great opportunity and it's an advancement each time because of their ability to be flexible, but then also identify, hey, here are the 3 or 4 things that I need to be working on because I might want to go left next instead of right.
I think supporting people's curiosity as well of like, hey, I remember having over the years where I've had conversations with people, and Lance, who was our first sort of guest on this podcast, was, he was always massively supportive of like, when I would talk about, well, I'm interested in this part of the business. Well, go and have a conversation with that business unit leader. That business unit leader, you work with them constantly on projects that they're working on. So go and have a chat with them about what they do and what type of things they need to do. And I think that's what people, as they step into a role, don't be kind of blindsided to having those conversations. And even if you don't work on projects with those individuals, I know there was actually a number of times where they were completely new areas of the business. I think just reaching out to those people and going, hey, I work in this part of the business. I'm interested in learning more about that because I don't know, it's the old adage of what do I want to be when I grow up? And it's like, I think you can be at any age. There was a great quote of from a song, actually. I think it was, those people that don't actually know what they want to do are sometimes the most interesting people. It's like, I love what I do, but it's like, I always want to keep those doors open. And I think that's what people whether they're job hunting right now, in a career, feel like they've hit a glass ceiling or feel like they've gone down the wrong route or whatever it may be. I think just taking off the blinkers and starting to have more open conversations across the business. I know you've been really open to those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you want both, right? You want the folks that are constantly searching for what's next for them, but then you also need to respect and celebrate those that are very happy in what they're doing. And unfortunately, sometimes those folks are labeled as the B player. They aren't perceived as pushing. But guess what? We need a lot of those individuals who are very good at what they do and very happy to be doing it. And then also very happy to be advancing and becoming more senior in what they're doing. And that's one of the things I think is amazing about professional services, is that it's one of the few tracks that you don't have to necessarily be pushed into a manager role or a management role to become very senior and to be very, very well recognized in the industry. There's a whole path there that allows people to stay technical and very, very good at what they do, that we can provide, that support for.
I think, even as a prime example, I won't use names on this one, but I remember an individual we hired as an SDR who had, I think he probably came with like 15, 20 years experience as an SDR. And the amount of times that you kind of hear people sort of go, and I've seen it over the years as well, I won't just use this specific example, but where people go, yeah, but they haven't progressed in their career. And it's like, when you speak to that person, it's like, I don't want management. I don't want the complication of, or the political element of having to manage staff. It's like, some people just don't want that. And I think that's awesome. And like you say, those individuals are, I think those people that always chase bigger, 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 bigger. It's a great, you've got to have a mix of people within a business to make it work, right? To have innovation across the business, you've got to have that mix. But some of those individuals, I think they're just working out, okay, they don't want to be a manager, but actually they're exceptionally good at mentoring. And I think that's where you're not taking on the full management. You're not doing, potentially having the difficult conversations or doing the performance reviews and the salary reviews and all these other things, but actually passing on. I think you tend to find those people are really good at passing on their knowledge as well. Like they really want to share their knowledge. And I think that's a really, really good key point for companies to consider.
Yeah. And that's what a senior technologist looks like. That's an individual contributor, right? They're out speaking at conferences, they're writing articles and getting published. They're leading smaller teams, not in a management capacity, but in a thought leadership capacity in order to produce standards. They're building out, what's considered acceptable on a global scale. Like that's what really senior technologists look like. They don't necessarily have to be bogged down in all of the things that are, people management and hiring and staffing, all of the things that are probably not as fun for someone who's really excited about waking up and dealing with technology day in, day out.
I remember actually when we went through some of our data cleanup, I'm picked the brains of multiple people on your team, but I know one individual specifically was just fantastic. I mean, the knowledge share, and for him, what we were trying to do was like, oh, I can do this easily. It's take me half an hour. And for us, there was 2 or 3 of us sat on this call watching what he was doing. And for us, it was like, okay, after half an hour, he's trying to explain how for us to kind of go and clean up the data, and we were like, yeah, we're never going to remember all of this. It's like, we're probably going to tap you up next time again as well, by the way. And he's like, it's fine, no worries. And I think those people really just passionate about helping business grow, helping other people, and I think that's always awesome. So very cool. So in terms of going on to looking at it from a candidate's perspective, when we've spoken about building great leaders, because that helps us share content out for people to be able for us to attract people. But it's like, how do candidates during the interview process, what's your advice for a candidate going into an interview process to figure out, is it the right role? Is it a company that offers this creative approach to different styles of roles? What are your key questions for a candidate to ask?
Well, I think the biggest thing is they need to remember it's a two-way street, right? They're not just, it's not just incoming questions that they've got to field. And it's not like passing a test or you get to the end. It's not like you're getting back a grade and then you feel how you feel about it is based on a number that gets shown to you or a letter grade. It's got to be a two-way street. They've got to know coming in. It's really important, even as an entry-level person. They've got to know what good looks like to them. Are they willing to take on a passion role where they're going to work 100 hours a week and that's okay because they're going to just love it so much and they're going to get so much out of it, career acceleration. That's okay sometimes. Is this the kind of career move that they want to be doing similar things that they're doing already, but maybe they want to be in a different industry or they want to be taking on a new skill? Like really knowing what their criteria is on what success looks like will make them a more successful candidate, because it allows you to have a real conversation about, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, where do you want to go? And then being willing to have an open mind coming in, but ask questions, like walk away from the interview knowing more about the opportunity than when you started, and not just through the lens of the person who's interviewing you. And then be willing to have real conversations. Like I've hired people that have said like, hey, like, I don't think that you're hiring the right thing for this role. And here's why. Like, I'm not, on paper, you may be saying that there's 8 things you need, but you didn't say the 9th thing. And I think thing number 3 might not be the right thing. And those are super helpful conversations as a hiring manager. Yeah.
I've certainly had those ones in the past, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But I think, like you say, it's a two-way street. If they kind of come away from that kind of going, okay, maybe there's an idea there. I've had companies kind of go, actually, we may need to reword the job posting because it's not, it's opening probably the doors too wide, for example. And I think, being mindful of the whole job description, job posting, menu versus recipe, or recipe versus menu sort of analogy that I've always used in terms of your job posting is your menu item. It's your cheeseburger, basically. It's not all your ingredients that go into it. And I think being able to look at that from a candidate's perspective, I've coached a number of people recently of not just thinking about, when you look at a job posting, obviously read it. Like, don't just kind of go, oh, there's a good title, that's in the right location, ping, I'll apply to that one. But kind of don't sit there and necessarily look at oh, I have to hit 100% of everything here, right? And I think that's where companies need to really be careful of, like, you can turn people off, turn the greatest people from applying off, because you have this laundry list of items, and actually sort of just toning it down, saying, what are the key things here, right? What are we really looking to achieve? Why are we looking at hiring this role?
Well, and it's also a little bit dangerous because there's a lot of studies that show that certain demographics, women, for example, will
Yeah,
look at a list, and if they can't check every box, they go, it's not me.
yeah,
Right. So it's really important that employers think about it that way.
yeah.
But I think that I would encourage everybody to think about it in terms of like, well, what's kind of really the intent
Mm,
of this? Do you have to know everything? And kind of going back to that, career matrices, being able to guide people. I think the more experienced you are in your career, the better equipped you are to go out and say critically, like, is this likely to be the best role
mm,
for me? If you're more junior, I think it's fine to go window shopping, for less than,
yeah.
lack of a better word. This is a little bit embarrassing. I did 28 first round interviews my senior year in college. I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I talked to a plethora of different industries, and I turned down a lot of second round interviews
Mm,
because I walked out saying, well, that one wasn't me.
yeah.
Nope, that one wasn't me. And then I had a fair number that I wanted to proceed with that I didn't get a second round interview, and that
Mm,
ended up being okay. But when I found where I wanted to go and it was a good match with the employer, like I could feel what good looked like, right?
mm,
I start to understand that. And I think that that's a big thing, for a candidate, is to be willing to say no to a second round interview if it didn't fit, or hey, I gotta have more information to feel
mm,
comfortable in proceeding with this process, and this is what I need to get out of it. Because I
yeah.
think every employer would like to have those conversations up front, not get to a final offer and then find
Yeah.
out
And go,
candidate didn't have
it's
their
not
heart in
right.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think interesting though, when you talk about the demographic point there, certainly, in fact, actually, a number of the people that I was coaching on this were, they were sort of, when I was talking about the way that they were looking at their job search, a lot of them were saying that, I spend so much time reading through job descriptions and then reading the company site and then going onto Glassdoor and Comparably and blah blah blah, all the different, and building up. You're trying to build up a complete book of that company before they applied, and it was like, no, you kind of take it on this point of the cultural points are, if it's an interesting area of business, if you fit like 60% of the role and it's interesting to you, then just really sort of put your hat in the ring for it. There's no harm in doing that necessarily. And I think that was more from a female demographic perspective, because I know from my past sort of studies on this, I think it's about 95% of that a female would feel that they have to meet 95% of that job posting
That's what somebody should.
before they would apply. Whereas a male, I think it's about 50%. I think that's
Yeah.
probably a little bit too.
Fighting
We
at
will
your
tend to
40.
go, yeah, go with that, go with that, go with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's
Um,
so interesting. Like in previous companies, like I've gone ahead and told hiring managers to try to make them be more aware of these kinds of things. And hiring managers, not even in my own department, and saying like, hey, like, are you aware of these things? Like, what do you need for education? And it's so interesting because I think the managers want to be educated on how to improve the experience to get a more diverse candidate pool, but they often, because they're not coming from that position of feeling that way, they're
mhm.
kind of like, what's the big deal? Like, why wouldn't you? And being able to close the gap and get people to understand like what that means for folks and how they feel in the process, and even
Yeah.
just how comfortable they are in asking questions, right? Like,
Mm,
you get, a candidate who kind of doesn't want to say the wrong thing because maybe someone might find out that of the 10 things, they're not excellent at
mm,
number 9, but they've
yeah.
got everything else covered. And that just does a disservice to everybody.
Mm,
You want those folks to be successful, and the best way to become successful is to
yeah.
understand like what's really important with the role versus kind of what was a nice to have, or maybe you don't have to be, fully
Mm,
experienced in that area. It's part of the training process, but it's
yeah.
listed because eventually it will become a criteria.
Yeah, agreed. So, I think in terms of there was another element you mentioned there about the how people are sort of finding out. I think I'll try and remember what I was going to ask you there. But I think interestingly, when we talk about the question and answer, that you're talking about the two-way street. I 100% agree with that. I tried to sort of coach people in, yes, you're going to have some question and answer points because there are some stock questions that you're going to have to sort of tick off, let's say. But the reality is, with an interview process, almost what I've tried to sort of train people on is this competency-based conversation, not a competency-based question and answer. Have a conversation. I think people are like, yeah, but the problem is if I have a conversation and I don't get my answers, and it's like you'll be surprised at how much information, especially with the skills-based switch that we're seeing now, like people switching away from the skills-based switching away from the experience over to a skills-based requirement. Like having a conversation, you can't necessarily do a competency-based question and answer for skills, but you can actually understand a little bit how somebody's minds work, right?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like I typically have prepped on an actual piece of paper
Good old
going
piece of
in,
paper.
not having looked at the resume, so I don't want to have it biased, but going through and saying like for this particular role at this particular time in this particular geography and with these customers, what's really important to me. Typically have 8 to 12 things written down and then have a conversation. And as we cover something, I will cross it out, check it off. And then I will make sure that I guide the conversation to the areas as we don't get to them naturally and make sure we have them. But I don't want to have a set of preconceived questions going in because I'll likely miss something about the candidate in that way. It's just, to me, you lose an opportunity to understand something that wasn't on your list if you stay very rigid. And it could be that they have something amazing that you just weren't thinking of.
I remember actually I used to use many years ago, back when I was recruiting, I used to talk to people about the market, like getting their opinion about what the state of the market was. And actually people from outside of our industry who really cared about data, using talent as a prime example here, but people who might have been in the security industry or whatever it may be, it's like, what's your opinion about the data market? What are your thoughts about it currently? And it was surprising how many people just had passion for that. And it was like, hey, okay, you haven't got experience in the data market, but I really want to see you in the process anyway, just because you have so much, you can tell that person's passion behind, well, security attaches data because of this or whatever it may be. And I think those, like you say, you can find those sort of special moments that you just kind of go, there's something great here that we can really actually help and help that person sort of find that trajectory that they're looking at. I did just remember the question I was going to, or the comment that I was going to make actually, where we were talking about when people are early in their career versus when they're seasoned in the career. And I think one of the things that I've started to learn, there was an individual who will be on a future episode, actually. He was talking a little bit about knowing your sweet spot. And I think from a candidate's perspective, we can't, okay, if you're early in your career, like you were saying, interviewing with as many places as possible actually is really good because it helps you understand what does good look like? What's your barometer point? But I think, as a more seasoned individual, understanding where your sweet spot for an organization is, I think was one of the biggest key takeaways. And actually really helped me because it helped me understand that, like, okay, this is the point where I love working in a business when it's growing from like 500 to 3,000. That's where I see innovation points. That's where I see that there's some foundations laid, but we've still got so much innovation we can do. And I think that's, for anybody searching for a role right now, just understanding where do you feel most successful? What has been your experience? And you may not have hit it yet. That's the reality of it. So
yeah, I completely agree. I think that understanding where they've been successful or where the culture maybe hasn't worked for them, I think those failure scenarios are super insightful because we, as an interviewer, we don't always understand like what gets that person out of bed in the morning and gets them excited to go to work. We can try to ask questions, but at the end of the day, that's an intensely personal preference. And so being able to recognize that as part of that two-way street of conversation is just incredibly important, I think.
Excellent. So thank you, Julie. I know we have a couple of minutes on the timer, so I've really enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate we could have spoken for another couple of hours on this, so we've had many longer conversations on this one. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining today, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll catch up soon. Thank you.